Hello and welcome back to PA Chalk Up. Today we've got a bit of a different episode. We've got Kelley and Patrick. Hi, how you doing?
Good, good. How are you?
We're good. Obviously we've got two people on today. We're talking about sports psychology and anything that sort of relates to an athlete's psyche and how that can affect their performance and anything else. So if you just give us a little background on who you are and what you do.
Hi everyone. My name is Kelley. I am from California, currently in Kentucky in the Masters of Sport and Exercise Psychology program at University of Kentucky. In California, I played collegiate softball at UC San Diego. I was an outfielder where I graduated with my bachelor's in psychology and I got a minor in philosophy. And what led me to the field is being an athlete, I went through tons of injuries and I felt that there wasn't enough help when it came to coming back with the fear, anxiety, confidence levels. So I kind of vouched to be someone that I wish I kind of had during my time as an athlete. So that's a little bit about me. Coming to Kentucky, I'm a big fan of horses, so I'm hoping to work with collegiate athletes while also working in equestrian populations.
Yeah, and so my name is Patrick. Like Kelley, I'm also a student at the University of Kentucky by way of Virginia. So I was a Division III athlete at Shenandoah University, which is in Winchester, Virginia. I ran cross country and track while I was there, and so recently have become a ranner rather than a runner. Enjoyed a long time running, anywhere from the 400-meter race to the 10K. And so I learned early on in running how much of the mental game is a big component. And so that inadvertently led me towards sports psychology. I kind of got close to it a couple of times. And then, uh, during my undergraduate, I took a class in sports psych, really fell in love with it. Decided, let's keep looking into this and leaning into it. And so now I'm here at Kentucky. And I mean, similar to Kelley, I look a lot at like the holistic development of athletes and their experiences. And so I know that there's so much more to a person than just the athlete or sport. And so making sure that the athletes I work with, that we're able to kind of enhance their overall well-being and life outside of sport, inside and outside of sport, is something that I truly value and hope to be able to do in my work in the future.
Perfect. So just a couple of things to get us going. Um, I love that the injury side of psychology because it's one that, as a spectator, you just assume that people, as long as they've done their prehab period, that they're good to go and nothing else matters. They're just go. But obviously there's that fear of it happening again. That's a big one. There's that anxiety of, am I able to perform the exact same way that I was beforehand? What's your guys' sort of experience on that, and how to sort of deal with some of those anxieties as they get through their rehab and then initial programming from the strength and conditioning and then to actually going on to perform?
I actually, through my time as an athlete, I went through 6 surgeries. Most of them were traumatic injuries. So coming back for me was tough, and I eventually medically retired due to the kind of chronic injuries that I am now dealing with still today. And from my experience personally, you go through so many emotions immediately when an injury happens. And, in psychology now, we talk about how it closely relates to grief. And a lot of those emotions include things, like the denial, the anger, especially the frustration, and the depression comes. And the emotions is kind of the part where I think for a spectator or even from an outsider perspective, it's something that's not often seen or talked about. So it's kind of an unseen struggle. So for athletes going through an injury, first it's all about kind of coping with the emotions that first are there and kind of learning not only the kind of awareness of what you're feeling, but how to manage them specifically. So that's kind of like the immediate post injury, and that exists through rehab too.
Mhm.
And we talk about motivation, especially during long term recoveries. I've gone through 2 ACL meniscus surgeries, both over a year. And so they're long. And so you have to have the motivation And kind of like you said, the latter half of that is coming back to play. And personally, for me, a lot of that was fear of re-injury, since they were traumatic. You know, I had a lot of nightmares. I had a lot of
Mm.
visions of it happening again. And, you know, to this day, throughout my career, even before it ended, there were some movements that I still could not do, just simply from the fear. So a lot of those things are kind of not talked about. And like you said, the expectation that you expect to perform at the level that you were before you got injured. But the reality of the situation is you have a new body part, or you are like interacting and trying to be active in a brand new body that you haven't had before. So the circumstances are different.
The thing that I liked about what you said, Patrick, as well, is you're no longer a runner, you're a runner. Can you
Yeah.
sort of dive into that and what you mean by that?
Yeah, and you know, Kelly kind of hit the nail on the head with the athlete injury experience. And so when I was running competitively and every single day, that was something I was used to. I had grown accustomed to the sense that I can go out for a long run and I'm going to be able to make it back to my home without needing someone to pick me up, or like I can make it out like 10 plus miles, be able to do that just fine. And so like when I tore the labrum in my hip during my freshman year of college, and so
Mm.
that was a point when I was like, at that runner moment of, am I going to continue my sport? Now this was right when March 2020 too, so or 2020 also. So
So you had that
coronavirus
COVID year.
was shutdown was everywhere. It was a lot was happening in everyone's lives, and for me, that was a moment of like, not sure. We're not really going to the doctors for elective surgeries. We're not, just different. And, training at home and then being on runs and realizing, not without knowing like what was injured, I thought it was just like a strain or a pull or something. But then those moments where you start calling parents and be like, hey, I'm stuck at the school. Can you come pick me up because I can't make it home without limping? Like
Mhm.
those moments, it really rattles an athlete's identity. And so, even talking about runner versus ranner, technically I still go on runs when I want to and when I need to. Like I can still do that. So what's for me to call myself a ranner? But it I guess it kind of shows the its own case study of athletes and their identity with sport. But injury gets so tied up with that because one of the things I've learned since coming to grad school is a big thing on when you're working with an athlete who has an injury, like leading off the conversation rather than like being like, oh, how's the leg today? Because it
Yeah.
makes their whole identity feel like it's surrounded by that injury. And it was, I didn't think about that until I put myself in those shoes and I was like, whoa, the days where I'm just wanting to be talked to like Patrick and not Patrick with the hip injury, it, when you're in an athletic setting, it's few and far between. Because I mean, everyone was rooting for you and they want you to do well, and so they might be like, Kelley, how's the knee doing? When Kelly's like, maybe just thinking, I just want to focus on something other than my knee. Because I mean, I know for a fact in running, but I imagine in many other sports, we're very self aware of our bodies and what we're experiencing and feeling. So when you have those minor like twinges and you're like, oh my gosh, I've re-injured it, or that fear of re-injury, it sends you right back. And so every moment you can get away from those kind of, uncomfortable and unpleasant thoughts and sensations is a relief. But it can be hard when your whole identity ends up, you know,
Mhm.
kind of surrounding it because you wake up every day with said new body part or new,
Pain,
rope
niggles,
that's
yeah.
keeping your hip together, whatever it might be.
Yeah, and you have both sort of touched on it, and I dislocated my shoulder playing rugby,
Mm,
and then I had to have surgeries and all that jazz. That in all fairness, it's happened since, but predominantly my fault. I didn't follow the rehabilitation program as I should have. So it is on me. But when the injury initially happened, my coaches decided it was a good idea to put me back in, like the same game. So more damage was caused from then
mhm,
on. But from there, it took me 2 years and a half to get surgery. So, and again, so much of my time, like I was in development squads, like I was doing okay. So my whole identity was sort of tied up in the athlete and who I was as an athlete, and then for a doctor to be like, yeah, you can't do any exercise now for 2 years and a half, like, and it goes back to what Kelley was saying. You hit the depression, you hit the anger, you hit like who am I now, like what do I do? how how is it dealing with that aspect of athletes, and how do you sort of sift through and remind them that they are also humans as opposed to just an athlete?
Yeah,
It's
that's a tough reality to kind of bring yourself to. And the first thing I think about when you mention that is like, controlling what you can and accepting what's there. I think that there's a lot to be said. I am biased in my opinion towards mindfulness practice. It's something I think is very beneficial and can be very beneficial if used in healthy ways, in the sense that being able to accept the circumstances that you're in and be graceful with yourself, like not too judgmental with the thoughts that come in, and those the feeling of defeat or depression, that anger that comes up with that injury recovery process, but really helping the athlete come back to the present moment and focusing on what they can control, what they can't, and accepting what is. Because like Kelley was saying, your first day post ACL surgery, you're looking at 6 to 9 to 12 months, depending on the person and the timeline of when you're getting back. And so, how do you keep someone motivated? How do you keep them
Mhm.
engaged and still remind them that there is more to life than athletics? I think that also lends itself to a person's experience, and have they experienced this before? Is this the first time? Because some have more awareness and understanding that, yeah, playing is temporary. I know what it's like to be out, but there's a lot that goes into that. That's a really good question.
no, I mean, I agree 1,000% with Patrick. At the end of the day, it's hard, and there are some things that you can control and some things that you can't. And one of those things that you can is like your values, what you hold closely to yourself, who you are. A lot of the times with athletics, we get so caught up in our identity, like we just talked about, of being in sport. So we view ourselves as maybe a great runner or a great softball player or someone who's fast. But really kind of digging into the athletes who are in the sidelines, like, hey, what are some of your core values that makes Patrick Patrick, or what makes me me? And that can be compassion or perseverance. And so reminding the athlete that you can show your core values of who you are outside of the sport when you're injured, can sometimes really help them transition a little bit better, and especially with those
Mhm.
long-term rehab plans. And that's where, if you really want to get into it, the support system comes into play. And with a team sport, how can you show that you're a great teammate? Focusing your support on other people and how you can lift others up as much as you can, kind of. So, kind of going back to what Patrick said, controlling the controllables and
Mhm.
realizing who you are at the end of the day.
Yeah, I will also say, Patrick, you should never run 10 miles just for fun.
You
Like
know,
that's
runner psychology is a whole nother podcast for you. That's a great point.
It's, like, the thing is as well, like, I've never gotten a runner's high. Like, that is not a real thing to me.
I've gotten it once, never again after that.
See, I get
Just
so
the one and
confused at
done.
this point. I
When
get
it's
so
done,
confused at
exactly.
this point.
It was too painful to get to that point. I'm like, no, not again.
I do apologize for putting you on the spot, Patrick.
No, yeah, it's okay. I fully relate to folks who are like, running 10 miles. Sometimes I'm like, yeah, 2 miles. There's a reason I don't run all the time. My body's tired.
Mhm.
Like I listen to my body. um, it's an acquired
Um,
taste.
on the back of sort of that injury and coming back, and how you sort of tie up your identity in that, how hard is it to talk to athletes and sort of get their head around like reoccurring injuries, and how to still remind them, look, you are okay to go and you can't do it again, and the fear, although it's there, but it shouldn't be as prominent because you have done all the work.
I think that's a lot of it is reminding them and validating them for what they have done and where they are. Um, I think back when I was going with my hip, and I feel like a lot of athletes have similar feelings. When we feel that sharp pain, you're like, oh my gosh, it's happening again, and your brain immediately goes back to the moment when you
Mm.
got hurt, or you find yourself on the training table and you're just like, I don't know what's going to happen. In reality, trusting the facts then, and like listening to the professionals that are there, whether it's trusting in the athletic trainers or the people who are providing you care, and saying, okay, well, if you know I had this injury, but now it's a different type, it's less serious, whether it's a bruise instead of a tear, whatever it might be, trusting in those facts of, okay, I understand that the symptoms I am feeling are in the same location and have the same sensation of what I once felt, but it is not necessarily
Mm,
reflective of it being that injury or a failure on my part for that rehab. Um, it's a lot harder to, easier said than done. Um, but when you can have a relationship with an athlete that is of substance, where you can kind of say those things and remind them and validate them, and they really like hear you, instead of being like,
mm,
"Oh, it's just another person who's saying it'll all be okay," and knowing the difference and when you're approaching it is, it's a very tactful thing. Because I mean, any athlete, we read through what's genuine and what isn't, and so being careful with what you say, and really intentional,
mhm.
um, so you're not just like blowing smoke or whatever you want to call it. Um, yeah,
That's an
Kelley.
interesting point as well, because like not all athletes obviously, but some athletes are so aware of their body that if you say like something that they might not be feeling, they could be like, well, that's bollocks. And then obviously sports psychology is built on so much trust that they speak to you and they really let down their guards with you to then have that and create that shift, or we're like, well, I'm just going to close. What are some tactics that you have found to like really build in that trusting factor for your athletes?
I would say, I mean, the first most important thing is simply for Patrick and I is just to show up. Sometimes, even if we're not physically talking to athletes that are at practice or at a game, just showing up kind of shows that we're there to support them. Whether or not they're ready to open up or to talk, that's the first building block of trust, to show them that there are people outside of their initial circle that care. That's the first thing that kind of came to my mind that I've noticed, a tremendous amount has helped. And obviously listening more than talking and
Mhm.
speaking is huge as well. I mean, oftentimes these athletes, they've been around the block, like they know what to do and what's going on, but sometimes they just need someone that's that third person just to listen. Especially sometimes they feel like they cannot go to a teammate or a coach or their athletic trainer, so sometimes they just need a buddy to talk to.
Mm.
So especially just being willing to take that back seat and ask them the needed questions to kind of get their brains thinking and validating them almost.
And I think that's so much of what psychology actually is just you prompt a question to this might be the wrong way to say it, but like you trigger that emotion, you trigger that feeling, and then hopefully that will cascade down into like where it's actually coming from.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you kind of tap into something like with listening, you're able to then reflect what you're hearing and say, is this right? Is this wrong? And then instead of telling them what's right and wrong, you're getting their perception and helping them see it in a more clear way. So that
Mm.
way you hopefully reduce the amount of times you have those interactions where someone feels minimized or shut down and says, I let down my guard and now I'm going to close back up. You try to avoid those situations by just listening first and then reflecting and those kind of things, just to help someone feel heard and seen. And like like Kelley was saying, just by showing up, it's it can be helpful in the sense that someone's like, they're not just some psychology person who comes down from wherever and tells me what my problems are. That's not really how it goes, but what they perceive is their reality. And so if they see you kind of at the training fields with them during rehab sessions, whatever it might be, like that might contribute to that 1% that they'll be like, I feel a little more comfortable. Or even if it's a
Mm.
teammate that's gone and talked to them and said, hey, you might want to talk to this third party here in a sense. And that could be really beneficial, whatever it might be. Just having that space and being present is one of the you know most powerful but undervalued or underrated uh,
Yeah,
things you can do.
and like I think that's the case as well for interns in the strength and conditioning
Mm.
aspect. The more that the athlete sees you in the gym and like dapping them up or saying that was a good set, or just like even just like minimally like handshaking and just doing the bare minimum, as long as they see you there and putting in that effort, they're so much more likely to trust you and to want to speak to you and give you that attention that we obviously need to do our jobs.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. And I have interned before in the strength conditioning sphere. And at the time, it was like, you're an intern, you're learning as you're going. And one of the most powerful ways you can show up is even if someone's like, "Hey, can you pass the ball back with me because I need a second body."
Mm,
And then even through that, they slowly feel more comfortable to talk to somebody, even if you're not like the designated point person. Whatever role you play on a support staff, like there's tremendous value in just being able to listen and have that relationship with someone.
100%. Something that you have sort of touched on, and I struggle with it sometimes, is the controlling the uncontrollables, or
Mm.
vice versa. How do you sort of talk to athletes about it and make them aware that you can't always control the uncontrollables?
I mean,
And that's a big one. I know. I know.
that's a tough one. But the easiest thing that pops up that I've really used for my athletes is just using examples. Especially with athletes, you want to kind of talk to them in not necessarily sports like terms, but in their specific sport term. So, especially kind of asking them, what can you control in your sport? That's stuff like the effort, the attitude, your values, like I could kind of talked about earlier. Whereas things like the score, if a sport is very subjective, that's out of your control. So you might as well do your best to, perform that skill with positivity, optimism, effort, attitude, motivation, all that stuff. And I think just especially for, people who are new to the field or trying to figure out kind of how to translate sports like terms to the athletes is specifically altering it to the sport that you're in, because that not only helps the athlete understand, but it helps that trust factor that we talked about and the
Mm,
relatedness too. And they want to feel like, you care about their sport. So, especially altering it in a way that's going to make more sense to them has really helped, especially with controlling the controllables. It's easy for them to relate to.
100%. Because like the the main thing for like a performance level is like you always want to be your best and do your best. But like what you've just touched on, some athletes are going to be better than you, and they're going to beat you at whatever sport and just whatever movement is required. So for them to be like, I really deserve to win, but at the same time, so does that person, and it's kind of a cruel thing to go through and try to explain to an athlete that that's not always going to be the done thing.
Yeah, exactly. And whether that's even, whoever you're going up against, like, yeah, they might be better skill wise than me, but I can guarantee you that I'm going to go in there with a much better attitude that they are. I can tell you that with no matter of a doubt in my mind, and kind of just helping athletes realize that that part is just as important as the rest, and not only for winning or performing or doing well, but also just for growth outside of sport, just being you as a person too. So especially with the controlling the controllables, I think that that's huge and kind of what Patrick and I do.
Mm. What's your way of dealing with the control and controlling the uncontrollables, Patrick?
Oh gosh. Well, I think the acknowledging the fact that you can't control what is not within your control is the first step in like just realizing what is and what isn't. So once we can identify it and kind of sort those two things out, being able to say, okay, now what? Like we're able to approach these controllables in one way, but when it comes to uncontrollables, and that's where I go back a lot to that mindfulness and just acceptance of
Mm,
knowing your circumstances, where you are, and making peace with what isn't in your control. Whether it be, Kelley mentioned the sense of, you don't necessarily know who's in front of you or who you're playing against. And if you think about it this way, if you're on a basketball team and you're trying to be the best small forward in the game on your team or in your league and LeBron James gets signed, I'm sorry, you're probably not starting. I hate to break it to you. It doesn't matter how well you've been playing. Odds are this external factor that's come in beyond your control is now preventing you from playing, which is beyond your control, no matter if you do everything right. And so keeping that in mind being able to accept, okay, what can I control? It always gets rooted back into the what can we controls, and like bringing it back into that presence of like, what matters now, what is, and versus what ifs. We can get caught up in the anxieties of the future or the worries from the past, and if we can root ourselves in what we have control over in this moment, like that's the best way to essentially control what's not controllable by just controlling what is. As backwards, upside down, and confusing as that sounds, there's not really an easy way to kind of control the things that are outside of your control, which I guess
Yeah.
hence makes them uncontrollable.
No,
It's
I
a
like
tough feeling to sit with.
Yeah, I like to get different people's opinions on that because although the common like golden thread is the same, like you just have to remind them that they can't control every aspect of their lives. There's different nuances to each one,
Mm-hmm.
like each person that you speak with. So I always like to get different aspects and different perspectives, and I always resort to this example. But like in an S&C way, like I can tell an athlete to squat because it hits the posterior, it hits like the muscle groups that I want. But I could ask Kelley or Patrick, and they could be like, "Oh, but it's also really good for the core." And you
Mm-hmm.
list out the examples for the core, so that way, like my knowledge base on that movement gets expanded. So like I really like to get different people's opinions on it because again the nuances of each way of interpreting different things is so uniquely to them that just builds the that topic for me in my head.
Yeah, no, for sure, for sure.
In terms of sort of performance, one thing that I really like to do with my athletes, especially if I've got those overthinkers, is distracting techniques. And I personally love this. If an athlete is stuck on a movement, say like a clean or a snatch, if they're overthinking in their heads, I love to get a little napkin, put it in their pocket hanging out so that they start thinking about it instead of the actual lift, and then they lift it. Can you just give us a little background to distracting techniques and how that works?
Yeah, that's funny you say that because I use that technique a lot, but in a different way.
Can I
Um,
just ask, was this, did you watch this in a golf, was it a golf video with a coin?
no, I did not watch it.
Damn it. That's the one I got introduced to. And like from then on, it was just like, yes.
Yeah. No, I gotta write that one down to watch it. But what I kind of like to do with athletes, and I kind of went through the same thing, for example, coming back from ACL, any sort of lateral movement, oh man, I would just have this
Mm,
mental block where the fear kicked in. I was overthinking it. It's like, I don't know where I'm supposed to land. I don't know how my body's supposed to be. There's so many things going on. And the one thing that I remembered in that moment that helped me is like, what is one thing? Just focus on one thing to focus on. And for example, for me, that was, landing firm on my foot. Didn't matter where, the rest of my body was. I was just focusing on one thing and that got me through it. And same thing now, the athletes that I work with, when you pick one thing, it simplifies the entire performance that you're doing or the skill. And oftentimes we're thinking about a million different ways to perform something when really it's just important to think of one. So kind of like what you're talking about when you think about the whole napkin example is you're focusing on the napkin. That's one simple small thing. And same thing with kind of everything with the skill. You kind of want to pick one thing to focus on and it'll kind of get you through.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'm right with Kelley on that. In running, there's so many pains that come up because,
mhm.
well, it's not like we have the hand-eye coordination to actually play a sport with the ball. As much as I wish I was a talent of mine, I'll leave it to the Xbox there. When it came to like in race, just pain you experience, like physical pain from being in an aerobic endurance sport, focusing on those single things. So in an indoor track, it's at least the ones I've been able to run on, they're about 200 meters. They're really small in the grand scheme of things. And when you're tasked with running a 5K, it's 25 laps. Good luck focusing for 25 laps. And
Mm,
so a lot of those times, picking those single cues is helpful, even in the sense of, making it from one lap to another. When I first got to college, one of the seniors on the team, they were great because I was trying to pick their brain and be like, well, what have been your experiences, and how am I going to like survive college running as a wee freshman? And they helped me a lot with this idea of breaking up the workout into chunks. and being like, okay, well, if we're doing a ladder drill, break it up and say, I've done one of the eight. I'm now, or two of the eight. I'm now 25% of the way through, and then chunking it like that. And that was a distracting technique. Or just eyes up around the track. These like instructional cues that you can give an athlete and give yourself to then have the time pass in a sense, and then running like you're saying with the napkin example of, oh, they got the lift up, they were focused on that, they got the lift up. And running, it becomes so monotonous. As long as you're hitting your paces and your goals, well, the time's flying by, like literally, and you're able to, you know keep going and distract yourself from the pain. And that always comes in like in a balance, in moderation. In a sense, you don't want to be so checked
Yeah.
out because you're avoiding pain that then you're not focused on what needs attention. But there's the cues and little things that can help an athlete with their performance, um, extend. I mean, it extends beyond sport. Whether you're in a car ride on the way to a job interview or something, like handling the nerves there, being able to focus on what's at hand, or driving through a storm. Like there's so many ways that it translates outside of it, which, I mean, personally, not to tangent too far, but that's what I love about like performance psych based mental skills, is that there's just really life skills, and it's just so fascinating how many little rabbit holes you can go into with it.
Mhm. Like that's the thing for me. So like I mentioned prior to the podcast starting, like sports as psychology and strength and conditioning is like what I love to figure out, because they spend so much time with us. It really starts with us on how they walk in the door. We can usually determine how that session is going to go. Like if I always give fist bumps, or I'll dap my athletes up if I know an athlete comes in and he's always hot, like he's always up for the session, he's always into what we're doing, but he gives me a half-assed fist bump that day. I'm like, "What's wrong with you today?" And it's having that again. These rapports are built over time, and like what I want to make clear for everyone listening is we're talking very quick examples, but these things are usually developed over time, and I'm sure you both will agree with me on that.
Yeah, I think that goes back to what Kelley was saying about just showing up, in a
Mm,
sense. In some internships you go and you may not say a word for the first week. You're just seeing what the
exactly.
operation is and seeing how things go. And this applies to any field, honestly. You just get a lay of the land and see where you fit. And just by being present, and you start to notice those little things. So then you feel comfortable to say, hey, this seems a little off. Like, you doing all right? Or is anything going on? Or you can pick up on those things a little
Mhm.
bit easier. Not saying you're going to get it every time, because, people hide stuff and are good at putting on a smiling face if they need to. But
100%. You kind of mentioned it before, Patrick, and it's having that concentration level throughout the performance. How do you help athletes who maybe sometimes switch off during like the height of their performance, and then they're not able to get back to that performance level that they want to be at?
in regards to like their mental focus, they're like
Mm.
focused on distracting to the point where then they're not performing as well as they want to. Is that what you
Yeah,
mean?
or like an external thing happens within the the performance that they just switch off, and then they're not able to go back into their performance zone.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of that, you know, comes to self-regulation skills and being able to ground yourself. So, I mean, naturally in any sporting event, there's going to be something that goes sideways. I don't know if any of us have ever run a race or played in a game where we were like, that was a very normal, straightforward, everything was just, no disputes, what have you. There's always going to be something that comes up after, you're like, can you believe that happened? And it's about like being able to pivot in those moments. Whether, I've seen people lose a shoe in a race and keep running, and you just got to figure it out. And you have options. So you're either gonna throw in the towel, so to speak. I mean, whether you actually drop out of a race or just say, well, it's all a wash, I lost the shoe. While it does pose a significant challenge to lose something like a shoe in that example, being able to, have that mental fortitude to continue and make the most of a situation, it can be challenging. But in those moments, a lot of it's just being able to ground yourself, in the sense of, whether it's coming back to that present moment, or having that kind of confidence reserve where you're like, this might be a challenge or something that's out of left field, pun intended, I guess, Kelley. Um, but I can handle it. I can take it in stride. Another pun, sorry, and really go with it and make the most of what's ahead of me, right? And that just goes a lot back to like the CTC, controlling the controllables, and the mindfulness of the situation. But there's not one. It depends on the athlete too. It's just there's not
Mhm.
one way to slice or dice it. I'm wondering, Kelley, what your thoughts are on that, building off of it.
Well, I'm thinking on a similar page, especially with the grounding.
Yeah.
With a lot of my athletes, what I like to do to help kind of ground them is almost troubleshoot. So, okay, when
Mhm.
those situations happen, what are some things that for you personally you can do to help bring you back to that moment, to that present moment of confidence or just resetting? And that especially becomes really important when we talk about failure and how are you going to come back from failure. That's oftentimes when the emotion dysregulation happens and we kind of get out of control. So I kind of help talk with my athletes like, hey, what are some things that you can do that's a cue word or something that
Mhm.
you physically touch or hear or taste that kind of brings you back to where you were before that random event that a shoe comes off or say that you get hit by a pitch or you strike out.
Hmm.
And, specifically with me in softball, I had to do that all the time. And since I was an outfielder, it came to be picking up grass, throwing it up in the air, rubbing dirt in between my hands, or looking at one spot in the sky. It's small things like that that can really help.
Mhm.
Almost like that manual thing, that tangible thing that you can grab and almost kind of let go. And with that, I kind of mentioned the cues, which is funny because we talk about cue words with rehab and stuff like that with simplifying things. And it's the same thing with trying to reset yourself in moments of uncertainty. It can be, you got this, or some sort of affirmation or word or funny joke or quote, kind of just something to redirect your thinking
Mhm.
back. That's kind of what came to mind with staying grounded, like Patrick talked about.
100%. Can I show you an example of what we're talking about? But it's split second.
Yeah.
So it's so I this fight happened recently, and what happened? I'll play the video. It'll make more sense.
Okay.
So he's going through the fight. It's a close fight up until this point, but the guy in the colorful shorts gets kicked in the groin, we'll say, and you'll see it in a second what just happens. So the ref stops. He stops the ref from interfering with the fight. But Jamal Hill, the black guy that's just been knocked out, checked out for a quick second. Then this happened. So I'll play that again.
Hmm.
Oof.
Yeah,
That's a good example of any split second moment. Drawing your attention.
especially in fight as well.
I was gonna say, and then especially in that sport, that's a very tough position to be in, given I guess the stakes there.
Mm,
Whereas in some other moments where if the ball isn't coming our direction in softball or we're running a 10K, there's moments to make up for the mental lapses. But it shows kind of the importance of just how
Staying on
much
it.
how much attention the sport requires.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was also going to say, just watching it too, it from that video, it almost looked like getting, kicked in the groin gave him an extra bit of fuel and like anger. It's like, you know what, you're going to hit me there. I'm going to hit you just as hard back, kind of. And it's funny because you can always match sports to different techniques. And
Mm,
what I saw there was just like coming back immediately after failure. Like you're going to get kicked hard all the time, but the cliche term, what is it? Fall down 7 times, stand up 8, something like that. It's kind of the same thing, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you can get multiple things from that video, but that's kind of
mm.
what I noticed.
No, perfect. Because like that's an example that I've been going through my head and like what I would have told or done in that situation. And it's like with MMA fighters specifically, like they can be so dangerous, and at like these split seconds, like you cannot check out at all because that will happen.
Yeah.
So I keep trying to say or think, what would I do in that situation for my athlete or for myself? What would you do? Is my question.
If I was personally in that ring, I'd be running
No,
out.
no.
Oh.
We'll go as the coach. Kelley just wouldn't be in that situation.
I am sprinting as far as I can away.
No, yeah.
Okay, sorry. Bringing it back. What was the
No, it's
question?
all good. It's all good. It's a fun podcast. We can laugh.
Oh yeah. So I guess kind of from the coach perspective, how you help the athlete there.
Mm.
Well, I guess it depends on the timing of it. If it's before he
And
ever
I
knows
suppose
that's
you can't
happening,
really control that either.
right? Like, I mean, if you were meeting with the athlete after the fact, I mean, it sounds like a broken record, but running back to where we are now, like a lot of that's in the past, and being able to work through that, however they're processing that event, but also talking about helping build that sharpness and that you know fine attention where it's almost unbreakable. Like that takes practice and practice and practice. But I mean, it starts with the simple awareness that there's the need for it, or
Mm.
a lack of, or a gap between you know ability and capacity and where you want to be in that. And Kelley and I were just talking about that earlier, and finding a way to maximize what's there. And a lot of that, if you're unaware of it, you're unaware of it. And that's not to say you're right or wrong or good or bad. That's just there's some behaviors we have that we're not aware of. And like I think when you're driving a car, you don't know if you think your tires are in the right spot on the road, and then you were to look at how you park and you're like, oh, I was not aware that I'm always parking on the line of the left line. Now I can adjust. There's things you aren't
Mm.
aware of. And so by simply having a sense of awareness that that is a skill that you want to work on, like then it opens up the doors for that kind of practice and repetition and
Mm.
training.
Fun fact, this sort of triggered this thought. Um, so I played rugby, and in rugby, if you're in a lineout, so I was the hooker, so I was throwing the ball in lineouts and stuff. So depending where the ball kicks, you can either be on your side of the pitch, which your coaches wouldn't say anything. But if you're on the opposite side of the pitch, the other coach and team will say things to throw you off your
Oh yeah.
game to sort of distract you from the lineout. So what my coaches would do is while I was at training, they would stand behind me and just like insult me to the max. Like they would call me every name under the sun, and they would just try and distract me whatever way they thought best. And it was then my ability to like ignore them. Is that something that you were sort of talking about in ways of dealing with that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the other thing that popped up into my head was we haven't touched much on goal setting, but
Mm.
sometimes it helps just remembering what your one goal is. And, for fighting, whether that be, straight knockout or you're focusing, your goal is to hit in one specific spot. That kind of, if you can focus on that goal, it almost kind of sucks you into whatever you're focused on in that moment. We talk about what's important now, but if you're focused on just that one goal that you set your mind to, then anything external is kind of going to go numb. You're not going to hear
Mm.
it. So
That's a
sometimes,
good.
oh,
Sorry,
go ahead.
that's a good point as well because you've got that narrow to wide lens as well in performance, and it's kind of like what you're touching on is like having that ability to either an open skill and you can focus on multiple. So like in your guys' case, if they're running with the ball, they've got to look out for passing opportunities and whatnot. But if they're in a free kick or a penalty, they have to zone in that focus and really shoot the ball to where they need it.
Yeah. And another example, I'll use me. It's not the best example for most athletes, but when I was an outfielder, I had a terrible tendency to run straight into the fence, into the outfield fence. I didn't care that there was a warning track. I didn't care that my teammates were yelling fence. Because at the end of the day, my one goal was to catch that ball. I did not hear anything. I did not feel anything underneath me. Yeah, it ended in some bruises, but it also ended in lots of catches that I ended up making because that was my one goal. So that's just an example that popped up in my head. When you're focused like that, nothing else around you really matters.
Mm.
So, for the arousal states that we talked about, definitely remembering what that one goal is and just trying your best to kind of focus in on that goal and hopefully not running into a fence. But
I
Yeah.
mean, that could be fun.
I mean,
We won't judge you, Kelly.
It,
depends on the fence. Some were padded, some were not.
it kind of makes me think about, in the sense, a lot of times in psychology, they always be like, oh, it depends. When you ever ask a question, the
Mhm.
person will be like, either what do you think about it, or it depends. And that's how real that is, in the sense where we're talking about keywords, a way to focus in, or where your scope of focus is. Because like the example I was giving about running and focus, just eyes up around the curve, it's very narrow. Meanwhile, lots of runners I know love a wide focus, a dissociated out of body, like I'm just gonna, look at those trees. Okay, that's cool. It depends on what the athlete's needs are and preferences. And so going back to cues, it's like keywords are fantastic if you think they're fantastic.
Mhm.
I personally I'm a sucker for a keyword because it helps bring me back in that moment. Like it's helpful for me. And if I can find something that's authentic and means something to me, amazing. Other people and other athletes, like they don't give two hoots about it, and that's okay. And being able to then, like, in that listening role that just anyone as a coach has, if you're just supporting your athlete, like being able to say, oh, well, okay, if that approach doesn't work for them, there's something to be said for trying new things. But if they're like, it just really doesn't do it for me, it just feels ingenuine, it feels unauthentic, being able to adjust to their needs and say, okay, well, what about this approach, or what are other, whether it's just general encouragement is what they need rather than a specific cue, then cool, you know how to best serve them. Callie, what you were saying kind of made me think about, how it just varies so much, and where we put our focus, and, you know, how we serve the athlete in that sense.
Yeah.
100%. I'm a big sucker for keywords as well.
Yeah.
It's something that I use a lot of, and I always find it weird to explain to athletes what that means,
Hmm.
specifically because, like, again, like what you were saying, Patrick, is like not all of them will have a keyword that they resonate with. So for me, I'm always like, I'll explain it and then be like, if you have one, cool, we can use that. If not, that's fine. We'll figure something else out, and we'll try and bring up that performance that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How would you sort of introduce keywords and explain what it is and the kind of ability to use them?
Hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
it. I think it's context dependent. So again, it depends. So sorry.
Again,
um,
no. So don't apologize for that, because in this industry, like, I'm very scientific brained where I like a yes or no answer,
yeah.
but I'm also a realist where I know it depends. Like,
Yeah.
would I get everyone to squat? Depends. Are there restrictions that means that they can't squat? Yes, no, depends.
Yeah. No, and exactly, like in your role specifically as a strength coach, you're likely going to be much more verbal than someone in Kelly or my role. Like it's your job to give cues, especially when performing hard lifts. Sometimes if you were to ask me going in a weight room with you, what cues do you need to, or what cues that you use to help you get through a hard lift? I would be like, well, I gotta rack my brain about it. But if you're out here and I'm learning the stages of a power clean or something, and you're telling me to shrug my shoulders or whatever the cue you're giving, like you just give it in your normal coaching practice, that might open up my eyes or put a light bulb in my head of, oh, that's actually a really good cue. And that helped me get through that. And I didn't even know about that or wasn't even aware of it. But it can help athletes based on, for you, what you're observing in like their posture, their stance, and their form, whether it's they need to keep a neutral spine, what have you. Being able to provide those cues might tap into something, again, they're not aware of at that
Hmm.
moment. But at the same rate, learning what fits the athlete best in that context. So in the weight room, that might be really, really effective because they're learning new skills a lot of the times, or practicing things they don't practice daily. It might just be twice a week, 3 times a week, what have you. But then in sport, if it's running a 10K, some person might have their routine and their rhythm, and that might be harder to modify in some senses. Um, but I think I think that your position specifically, how it makes it so unique and stuff, is that you basically have a green light to cue and coach and yell in that environment of rah energy, of hyping people up, and some things may stick with some, and um, that can be really powerful.
I do think it depends a lot though. So I coach females as well, and
Hmm.
they're not always the same as men. Like, you can yell at a guy and just to yell at a guy, and he'll be like, "Sweet, cool."
Yeah.
But for female athletes and female in the gym, and I've had this recently. So I had a female client who, she loves going to the gym. She loves doing the gym and partaking in that activity. But for most females that I've spoken to, the gym doesn't come as naturally as it does to say me or you, Patrick. Like they have some thoughts behind, oh, people are looking at me, people are doing this, 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 or this.
Mm.
So they'll kind of like shrivel in. So I asked her like, what aspect of your life do you feel most confident about? Like that really gets you like, yeah, I'm the shit on this. And she was like, playing the piano. I was like, cool. So before you go to squat, pretend you're getting ready to play the piano. And like, I didn't even cue anything, but she was like, this straight away.
Yeah,
So she postured up straight away. I was like, there we go. Now do that as you begin to squat, as you begin to do any lift. Think about, I'm going to start playing the piano. And like that cue really touched her because she was like, okay, that's what I do now.
that's fantastic.
Yep, absolutely. And it's funny that you kind of use that example because in my head, it's funny. Our profession, it's almost like trying to when you're trying interventions and keywords, trying to see what helps different athletes. Coming from a philosophy minor, I totally understand that it depends. Philosophy lives and it depends. So for us, it's almost like we're trying to figure out which key goes to what lock. And
Mm.
the fastest way to kind of figure that out is just by asking the right questions. So the example you just gave, perfect. Simply just asking an athlete, say after a squat, it's like, hey, tell me about how that felt. And you might get a response that becomes a cue word. It's like, okay, say that, they performed a squat they weren't happy with. Hey, tell me about that. What was going through your mind? Like, how did that feel? And sometimes just simply asking like that of what emotions and feelings and thoughts are kind of going on, that can quickly relate to a cue word or an intervention that might be helpful for them. So for that example, it was like, hey, let's talk about confidence. What's something you're confident in? And that worked for that athlete. So it's kind of the explanatory bigger version of saying that it depends, but that's something that kind of went through my brain is just asking those questions.
And I think building off that, I feel like any coach or person who wants to help someone feels the pressure of, I want to help them, but I don't know how, or I don't know if what I'm going to say is the right thing to say. Like you put that pressure on yourself, and one of the best ways to remove that is just to, again, like Kelly's saying, ask those right questions. Of, you tell me what you need. I'm the like you might put that pressure of, I need to be the expert in this. I need to know everything that they're talking about, but every human's experience is different. And so, like in your role specifically, if Kelly is saying, "Tell me about that squat," and they say, "My shoulders really hurt," then you immediately fast forward to, well, one, you open the space for them to talk and listen to them, but you're also in a position where you can say, "Oh, well, I know that if you move from a high bar to a low bar, that might be beneficial," and you can remove all that, theoretically remove all that pressure from yourself of knowing the right answer of, I observed this, more of, tell me how you felt during that. And I
Yeah.
think that's a great example, Kelly, of like listening and attending to their needs, and kind of controlling what you can in a sense. All comes back
It
to
does. And
it's on
I think
itself. It depends.
that's
It's
that's what's so sick about like this industry is like in a normal sports science degree you learn a bit of everything and then you specialize and that's all that you focus on.
yeah.
But like to be really, in my opinion, I will say that in my opinion, to be efficient and effective in this industry, you need to tap into all those sources. So like I will apply biomechanics, I will apply physiology, psychology, like sociology. Even some, I hate sociology with a burning passion, but I understand it. So like it's not about like being an expert at all of them, that's impossible, but it's like having enough knowledge in all of them that you can either refer them to someone that really knows about it and really can help with that case, or just being able to apply to your programming or to your philosophy or your principles to help in the best way that you can.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, at the beginning, Patrick mentioned it's all about the holistic athlete. There are so many factors that go into, the way an athlete feels or the thoughts that are going in or the behaviors that they're having. And a lot of that has to do with past, present, future, all that stuff. So understanding, their situation, what they've been through, what components are at play. I mean, that's huge, and not only in the careers that we're going into, but just life in general of just being a person and a human. So I think that's a huge point that you brought up.
I think you killed it. It's being the human, and I think I think as coaches and as practitioners, like just being a human to your athletes, like you can get so much more out of them. Like I love when I mess up during a training session because it gives them that view into I am also a human and not just a robot. And I will own up to my mistakes. I'll be like, yeah, I fucked up. And there's usually a punishment for fucking up. So I'll do a down and up and then I'll get back up and we'll go. When it comes to performance, and we've sort of touched briefly on it, performance anxiety is a big topic within elite level sports. I know of cases where a gymnast, every time before they were about to start a competition or a meet, she would throw up. Can you sort of talk about performance anxiety, how it may manifest, and how to sort of mitigate some of them side effects?
First thing I think about, I think when you ask, oh, talk about performance anxiety, we each think of our own experience with, oh, yeah, I know what you're talking about, and it could be sport specific or not. It varies, and you know, at least for me, rooted in the future, rooted in what's not yet here, and for me, when I would experience the most performance anxiety, I was in high school, and I was more worried about things that were outside of my control, like kind of been talking about. But once I was in the race, I was fine. It was just everything leading up to that I just couldn't bear. And so in more short burst, high intensity movement sports where you're not having things last more than 10 seconds, I can imagine that'd be extremely crippling to the point of you can hardly do a movement or a jump or something if that's your whole event.
Mm,
Um, you don't have the luxury necessarily of feeling good after a mile or 10 minutes or whatever you want to, you know. And so, looking at performance anxiety as a whole is figuring out where it's rooted for that athlete and what's kind of bringing up those things, whether it's a lack of confidence, if it is a fear of injury, whatever it might be, figuring out what the root is, like Kelley's saying, by asking those questions and helping them tackle the issue.
Yeah, no, I think Patrick hit it right on the head. I mean, especially when it comes to manifesting, finding the root of the problem, what's actually going on. Because oftentimes, when, I'm sure we've all experienced levels of performance anxiety, like many athletes, but the question is how often did you talk about it? And I think when it comes to manifesting, if it's not something that you're talking about or that you're acknowledging and kind of working through, that's when it starts to really manifest. If you kind of are holding it all in, you're eventually going to explode and it's going to feel suffocating. So we talk about like the support system and who you're talking to and who you trust. And that's the importance of, what we're all doing right now is trying to spread that awareness that it's okay to talk about those things. And especially with the performance anxiety that can so easily manifest not only in your sport, but outside of sport. If you're a student, and an athlete, then that's going to manifest, say, on the field, but also taking an exam or have a little bit of social anxiety. It manifests in a lot of different ways. And that's the importance of the root of the problem, but also acknowledging that it's okay to talk through it and to
mm.
let it go. Because the more you hold it in, the more, it's going to kind of explode. So yeah, that's kind of my 2 cents, is starting to normalize those conversations.
100%. I'm writing a blog post at the moment. It's taken me like a solid month to write this blog post. It's a very, very long one. And I'm constantly debating whether to split into a million different pieces or not. But I talk about the exertion levels that being different types of performance has. So, like, say an athlete is a shit talker, like that still takes energy to still be in the moment of presence playing their sport, but they've got this added thing where they're now talking shit or they're more reserved and more calculated. That takes energy as well. What are your guys' take on the mental load that these different sort of playing styles have on athletes and how that then transfers into their training and speaking to people around the performance level of it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the first thing that popped up to my head is just all the stressors that we all experience. And I mean, taking college athletes, for example, you have, say, you're a freshman, you have the stress of moving to a new place, you have the stress of academics, stress of having new teammates, expectations of performing in front of coaches that recruited you. Gosh, it's endless. And all of those things, all of those stressors take up a certain percentage of your energy, like you just mentioned. And I think the easiest way to kind of break that down is like, okay, let's focus on how much energy you give to each thing. And that's when you really can figure out what's beneficial for that athlete and what's not. And sometimes just simply laying it out in front of the athlete really does help them, because odds are they have no idea how much energy they're giving to
Mm.
things that are harmful to them outside. So definitely kind of associating how much energy you're choosing into what category, and helping them realize that the more energy you give to those uncontrollables, for example, the less energy you have to focus on what you can control. Um, so that's kind of my experience when working with those kind of athletes.
I really like that point where you're now bringing sports into collegiate setting where they are also having to do a whole degree on top of
Yeah.
of performance at the highest level. Um, what are your sort of key key talking points with athletes when they also have like exam week and preparations for tests and all that stuff, but still having to perform a sport at a high level?
Self care.
So, hey, I like it.
Some lean into it hard, some are not as gung ho about it, and that's okay. But whatever it looks like for them to be able to have the charge, the battery, or the filled cup, whatever your analogy you want, to go about their activities. I mean, think about, have you ever performed at a competition while you were sore? Yes. Everyone has been sore at one point and still was expected to perform maximally. In the same sense of, you're going to be expected to perform maximally and you have exams and all these other stressors. Well, how do you take care of yourself when you're sore? You rest, you relax, you ice bath, use the foam roller, whatever it is. Those self care, in a sense, taking care of yourself techniques that help, you know, best prepare you for that, in the same sense of, best prepare yourself for whatever you value and is on your plate that week. For some, depending on their scale of athletics and the role they are in their team, their attention, their priority list is game exam, and others it's exam game. Like whatever it is, being able to prepare yourself to best contribute in those areas as best as you can, because at the end of the day, exam week is always a fun
Mhm.
time, sarcastically. Um, for athletes, just given the demand, but whatever you need to do to fill your cup and be able to take care of yourself is ultimately what I first think of is, what do you need?
Mhm.
Yeah. And I mean, to kind of go off of that, we've mentioned it a little bit of like the what's important now kind of thing, when you have those exams and you have those external kind of factors going on. Something that I actually did when I was a collegiate athlete, and I use now for my athletes, that when they do have exam week, I used to have a light switch. I carried a light switch around on my backpack, and to me, what I used to do is I would go from obviously class to practice. And for me, for example, whether it was class that was taking up a lot of my energy or if it was practice and performing well, I would turn my light switch on and off. I'm like, okay, I'm going from class to practice. So my light switch is turning on. And to me, that meant my light switch is on. I'm purely focused on practice right now. I'm here. What's important right now is that I am present, ready to play. When I left the field, light switch was off. Everything that just happened is not important. Now I need to focus on my academics and studying. And that just kind of like manually doing that, turning the light switch on and off, really helped me figure out what energy I needed and when. And especially when it comes to pressure and being an athlete and all those stressors and even just daily life, I use that light switch because I still need it. I still need to remember what I need to focus on, and what happened in the past doesn't matter. So I don't know, a little caveat there, but that's what I
Yeah.
personally used.
That's a really interesting way of thinking as well, because like obviously there's, and you've just pointed this out to me. There's physical and there's mental. Like they're not really cues, but they're like switches. What you've just said. So like for me, it's a door frame. As soon as I walk through that door frame, like everything else that's going on behind, that just stays there. And then when I walk back out, I pick it up and take it. That's interesting.
Yeah, no,
That's
exactly. There are so many ways that that shows up in our lives, and odds are we don't even realize that we do it, or that we have, again, that kind of grounding technique. So, yeah, same
yeah.
thing.
I'm going to say a name, and I want to get your immediate reactions on it. Carl Dweck.
Mindset.
Oh, gosh, yes. Okay. I'm following now.
Yes. I just finished that
Let's
book not too long ago, so it's fresh in here for me.
that's like with my whole college and university program, like that's someone that we always went to. So like hard work is like just permanently engraved in my head. Um, what's your techniques for that growth mindset compared to that obviously closed mindset?
Oof, so many.
I mean, yeah,
I
to
know,
start.
like that's the thing, and I'm I want to apologize because I'm asking very broad questions on very specific topics, and it's like what we're discussing. Like we can pick one of these topics and just go like 2 hours into it on a
Oh
podcast.
yeah.
So we're like doing multiple in one, and we're just like zooming through them.
Yeah. I mean, with growth mindset, the first thing that pops up into my head that kind of helps stay on track is just gratitude and appreciation. And that personally I've found to be helpful, and especially for my athletes, the saying that it's impossible to be stressed and grateful at the same time. So similar to that, if you're grateful for the process, you're grateful for how far you've come in the process, then it's a lot easier to have that growth mindset than the closed mindset. So the appreciation for where you are, where you've been, what you have around you. At the end of the day, that kind of exceeds any sort of kind of closed mindset thinking.
Yeah, I think building off that, what was one of the most impactful parts of that book for me was, I think it was near the end, and in it she was writing about how, important it is to be genuine in the open
Mm,
mindset. We're not giving out freebies of, you know of reassurance and stuff when it isn't warranted, in a sense of validating uh, healthy behaviors as they come up, and not necessarily, you know giving false hope, or this false recognition of a mindset that actually isn't a growth mindset. And so being able to really understand what it involves, and how, intentional you have to be with that, and how it's not easy by any means. It's easy to say, oh, I have a growth mindset, and then once you read the book you're like, whew, I got a fixed mindset. And putting yourself in those buckets, first of all. But realizing that it's an ever changing and ever evolving thing, and that there are days when you are more open minded and other days where you're more fixed minded, and that's okay. But
mhm.
learning through that, um, I think that was one of the most like impactful parts of that book, was really figuring out, oh gosh, how do you walk that line, and kind of dance that dance.
I think that's a good way of putting it. It's not like a linear thing that you just reach the pinnacle of growth mindset. It's a more undulating where you will dip into that
Yeah,
fixed, you'll growth dip and go on and so forth. That's a really good way of putting it too. Um, in terms of like growth mindset versus fixed, is there specific things that or cues that you give to your athletes to sort of be like, hey, we're dipping into that fix. Let's try and come out the other end and go more into that growth mindset.
Hmm,
it's a great question.
that is a good question. Um, I would say I use trust a lot.
Mhm.
Um, a lot of I think when it comes to kind of like the fixed mindset, you forget about trusting the practice you're putting in and every little like small step that you're doing. Um, you know, if you make a mistake, it's really easy to get caught up in, oh, well, that's not helping me at all. It's like, hey, remember, like, trust what you're doing, even though it's not turning out right now. Again, like we just said, it's not going to be linear, it's going to be all over the place, right? So, kind of what's helped my athletes when it comes to doing the growth mindset. And I recently did a workshop on growth mindset, and the huge takeaway was the trust the process factor. So now at practice, my athletes look at each other and like, hey, that wasn't so growth mindset of you. Remember what we're doing? You got to trust what we're doing. So that I think is probably the most popular keyword aside from just looking at each other and be like, hey, growth mindset, remembered, but the trust I think is really helpful.
Yeah, building off that, I mean, oh, I could throw back at you. What do you think of when you hear five dysfunctions of a team? There's a book out there about five dysfunctions of a team, and it builds this pyramid of essentially it's a fable about a dysfunctional team, and you can flip the pyramid and be like, this is how to make a functional team. But see, thank you so much, Kelley. It's like
Yeah,
it's a good book, it's a good read, it's a nice little story to go with it that kind of makes the uh, chalk talk a little more like digestible in a sense. But in it, the baseline for a successful team is this like presence of trust, whereas the baseline for a dysfunctional team is an absence of trust. Well, that's why there's dysfunctional. It's at the root there's no trust, and one level above that is this fear of conflict and being able to. Oh, there we go. Yeah,
yeah,
that
yeah.
kind
I've
of
got
like
you.
the next level is this presence of conflict and being able to kind of lean into that. And so I mean, you think about Manny, what's your favorite sport to watch recreation as a fan?
I only watch MMA. Like I've give up
Okay.
on watching different sports.
Okay, yeah, okay, well, you could take this MMA with.
Arousal and
Hmm?
excitement levels. Like I have to see action like
Yeah.
straight away.
Yeah. And so, you could take your favorite MMA fighter and you're in the rounds of the match, or Kelley, if she has her favorite football team, like whatever it might be, and the season's going on or a match is going on, and there's those pivotal points where you talk about momentum and momentum swings and what are they going to do in those moments when character shines through and all the things you want to say, being able to address if there's conflict there and say, okay, we can grow through this or we can keep it going on the way it's headed. If your perception is the teams or your fighter is on this runaway train downhill, we're like, oh, they've lost this match. Who else is going to make a comeback? Who else is going to write that other than you? And so being able to view it as it only takes one, like whether it's one hit to land, one good possession, whatever it might be. All it takes is one for you to, flip a script and take control of that. And so, really leaning into that when it comes to having growth mindset in the sense of, being like, oh, this is how it is and this is how it's going to be. And taking a step back, opening up and saying, okay, let's remove some of the emotion from this first part and see what's possible with the second part. Because the emotion from if it's a game where there's two halves, emotion from the first half, we're upset. Okay, how can we leave that and look at the second half
Mm,
as an opportunity to get
to get
better, to make a comeback, to increase a lead, whatever you want to perceive it as, or your goals are. Yeah, just viewing the next thing as an opportunity, being able to separate past,
mm.
present, future, and all that.
One question that I've sort of been exposed to more often now that I've coached across there and deal with different people. How do you deal with cultural differences and how they view that level of psychological ability to differ between like losses, wins, and anything in between?
I mean, my first thought, and with experiences I've had with athletes from different backgrounds, is learning what their values are and what wins, losses, their whys, what all of that means to them. I mean, a question I ask a lot of my athletes is, what's your why? What gets
Mm,
you out of bed in the morning and takes you to play sport? Why do you do it? Because it's exhausting, and
mhm.
there are days that aren't fun and there are days that are hard. What keeps you going when things aren't going well or things are hard? Why do you do it for the fun parts of it? All that considered,
That is actually
the
one of
way,
my favorite questions to ask athletes is like, what is
yeah,
your why?
yeah, because if you don't have a sense of what your why is, and when it comes to anything that's going to challenge your motivation, you're going to be left kind of with the question mark of, oh shoot, why do I do this, and what makes me happy about this? But the answers range all across the board. Some do it, with any sport. Some do it for fame, recognition, money. Some do it for, their family, the intrinsic feeling they get. Everyone has different motives. And so culturally, it's different because some folks will it means a lot for their family because of what they gave up to let them play their sport. Others, it's, generations and generations of I'm, so and so the fourth, and all of my parents were star quarterback. Like it's that kind of thing, or what it means to different people. Once you figure out what that means to that person, then you can kind of look for those you know, next best steps of how are we going to process this in a way that's healthy for them, uh, and keeping in mind those cultural differences. Whereas I might perceive something, I might perceive if I'm on a baseball team, 162 games, Kelley, is that right? 162 games?
Something like that.
Way too many games for a season. I might perceive one loss as, yeah, whatever. And another person might take it very seriously. And at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what I perceive it as, is what they're perceiving as, what their needs are. Um, that's where my brain first went.
No, I mean I would agree with that. And with when you have these athletes with different backgrounds, whether that's like cultural, just past experiences, it's all about again like building that rapport and kind of learning more and more about that athlete, but not just for us, but for the coaching staff, for the athletic trainers, for the strength coaches, for their teammates.
For the
There's just
Mhm.
such a big importance in understanding each other, especially when there are cultural, differences. And, to go off of what Patrick said, especially with asking the right questions of what's your why and what does winning mean to you? What does success look like? Because what I view as success is going to be totally different than what Patrick views as the success. And that can kind of tie in with the why, but it's just another important question to ask. And especially with understanding behaviors or why athlete will act one way versus the other. I know that for example, played with New Zealand for a while with their softball team, and even just understanding those cultural, thank you, even understanding those cultural differences, here in the States and coming from California, everyone is so uptight. So when I make a mistake or when we lose a game, like everyone is so stressed, like, oh my gosh, like we needed to win that game. Whereas going and playing with New Zealand, everyone was laughing and joking and carrying around and just enjoying their time. And that's just a prime example of how we're playing the same sport, but there are going to be differences in how you
Mm.
react and respond to different situations. Not that one's good or bad, but that's the importance of again like building that trust, showing up, understanding each other, and kind of diving into not only who we are as athletes but as people
Mhm.
culturally. That's how I
I
answer.
think that's one of the biggest things that I've sort of taken away from my different coaching experiences. Like culture hasn't always been like talked about enough, that there is differences, and depending where you're from, you're going to interpret things differently. Like you've just mentioned, like New Zealand, they're a little bit more relaxed. I'm Portuguese, so we're a little bit more rough with things. Like if we lose, like we offend each other. Like that's our go-to. Whereas like from my experience in America, like you can have some really uptight people, but you can also have, oh, well, at least we tried.
Mhm.
Right. And yeah, I mean, it's funny you bring that up because my dad is from New Zealand. And so growing up, I had that kind of difference. But even just hearing you talk, it's like my dad behaves in ways that like I do
Mhm.
not. And, especially going back to the New Zealanders, they don't have filters. They just live life to the fullest, all that good stuff. So growing up with that, I was kind of already exposed. And I think even then, just also putting yourself in certain situations to give yourself exposure to different cultures and talking to people and working to understand, I think is huge.
One of the most beautiful things that I've found with like Pacific Islanders or just Islanders in general is like their family morals. Like everyone's a brother, everyone's an uncle, everyone's an aunt. Like that's, to me, that's so beautiful because it's like, yeah, like love each other the way you would love your mom, your dad, your uncle, your aunt.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. One thing that made me think about, in the sense of, language barriers even.
Mm.
And and I'm going to make a comparison of English to English. Of one of the biggest things I noticed working in soccer, knowing when people
Football.
check in on you. Oh, sorry. Do you see exactly? Well, there's one. There's one perfect example. That couldn't have laid that better.
I did this to Massa and PM. They
Oh,
like they
that's
were just like soccer, and I was like, it's not soccer.
yeah. So
So
in football, in football, in worldwide football, I will say, not American football, worldwide football.
I am joking. I am joking.
Yeah,
You can call it soccer.
that was good. That was good though. Prime example. But when people check in on you, they say a lot of times what I've learned is people from Britain will be like, "You all right?"
Mm,
And my first thought when I hear "You all right" is something wrong?
Yes.
And I'm accustomed to that means is something wrong? Like is there something with my face, my teeth? Like, and for me, the way I'd say that is, "How are you doing? Like you doing
mhm,
good?" And so learning that when some for a while when I first was involved, I was like, "Does this guy think I'm okay?" Like is I didn't know if I was presenting weird or I looked like nervous, and I realized, oh, that's just standard of how like the language, same language but different interpretation, and how that makes it all the more important that we're clear in our communication with athletes, regardless of our role, and understanding where there can be miscommunications and reaching that agreed understanding. It makes it all the more tricky, but in that example, a learning curve. You're like, oh,
yeah,
that's what that means in this sport, in this specific sport culture and context.
yeah. I'll take it one step farther with that.
Mhm.
So there's also a big cultural difference on how people reply to that question. So
Oh.
Yeah.
yeah, so you ask a Brit, "You all right?" They'll be like, "Yeah, I'm good." You ask an American that, they'll be like, "Yeah, I'm fantastic. Like, I'm ready for this." Like, there's that. It's a little shift. They both mean the same thing, but y- the energy behind it is different.
Mm.
Mhm.
Which then is that culture. Like, Americans do it bigger. They do it on some things better, but the UK downplays how we feel in our emotions because we
Mhm.
don't want to seem too excited about things.
Mm.
Interesting. Yeah. And I mean, that goes right into the cultural differences of how people express emotions. And you
Hmm.
can, whether it be from where their upbringing was, male, female, past experience, whatever, it varies and depends in so many different ways. Um, but
100%.
by building those relationships with your athletes and having those genuine connections, like, that goes leaps and bounds to and being able to give them the support, the best support that they uh, can get.
100%. I agree. Um, what would your guys' walkout song be
Oh goodness.
Oh, I had one.
to follow
Oh,
Kelly? I'm throwing a wee curveball in there.
Hey, I mean, I got a pick from the ones that I had. Um,
I'll check my Spotify. Give me a minute.
oh my gosh.
I don't think it's gonna be in there. I think I have my answer though.
I would say out of all the ones that I had, the last one I had was my favorite, and it was oh, hold on, I need to check to see who it's by,
Yeah,
so
let's go.
I don't mess this up. Um, but I'm a big person on like words. So
Mm,
I'm like words of
yes,
affirmation, quotes, that kind of stuff. And so at the time, I was entering my 5th year, and this was I think 5 surgeries later, and I. I mean, obviously, I didn't know at the time that I was going to medically retire, but I picked the song Battle Scars.
Lupe Fiasco.
Yes, thank you.
so,
See, I should have just said it and you would have gotten it for me. But
But
I picked Battle Scars because to me it had
symbol.
so much meaning. It had just so much meaning, and not in the sense that like it pumped me up, but in the sense it's like, wow, I'm walking out here knowing how much I've been through, and despite all of that, I'm still kicking it. I'm still doing what I'm doing. So that would be mine.
I'm gonna ruin the wholesome vibes, Kelly. First thought, I think it was the other week. The Home Depot theme song.
Yes.
It's Home Depot. I don't know. Is that an international company? I actually have no clue. It's like a
It's not.
lumber store. A lumber store.
Yeah, I am aware of what it is.
Oh, okay, gotcha,
I
gotcha.
don't know what the song is.
There's like a jingle with like the commercial that they have for it. It's just
Oh,
Okay.
some jingle, and I heard it once, and I was like, that would have been my walkout song.
Yeah.
No words, no relevance. It's just, I have a hard time thinking. I'm almost grateful I didn't have to play a sport or I didn't play a sport where I had to have a walkout song, because how could you decide? The music, there's so much to it. There's so many great songs. How could you decide on one, Kelly? And that
Trial
one's
and
almost so silly. It's easy.
error.
Pioneer. So like I usually ask strength coaches their PR song, and you get some really interesting songs. Um, Yesterday it was "Zombies" by Bad Wolf.
Uh-huh.
Amazing, amazing. I was like,
Mm,
I'd never heard of it, but it was like, yeah, that's a good one. That's a
that's
solid.
yeah,
What would yours be?
My walkout song.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, see, I'm big on lyrics as well, and I will preference this. I hate him for the person that he is, but the music he puts out is phenomenal. Chris Brown has a song with Chipmunk, and like Chris Brown has a lyric in there. Oh, wait, I'm gonna pull it up because like it's just like that comeback, and it's kind of what Kelly was saying. Is like when you've been through so much, like certain lyrics sort of like touch you in a way that's
Oh
like,
yeah,
fuck yeah, this is what I'm about.
oh yeah.
While you're doing that for the viewers,
Oh,
Like,
look at that.
nice.
I had it on lock. I was like, just in case people wanted to know.
Bookshelf
Yep.
out there. Mine's like, I bought it used and it's paperback, and it went in many backpacks on many trips that it never fully got read in, bit by bit by bit, and so it's holding on by a thread at this point.
Gosh,
It's a good book. Good book.
it is.
That and uh,
I found them. So it's like this specifically is the one that really like I don't know if you can see that properly.
Yeah.
yeah,
And then it goes into that which that was like that would probably be my go-to one where
Right.
it's just like real lyrics to me.
yeah.
Yeah. No, I understand that.
Second question, what is your conditioning playlist? Like cardio
Oh,
based, where you're running. Patrick, I'm going to not say the 10 miles, just anything else.
I was gonna say, shoot, when you go on as many runs that are that long, you go anywhere you need. I've gone books, podcasts, what have you. If I'm really dreading a run and I'm trying to distract myself from it, I'm. I think I once tried to listen to The Great Gatsby on audiobook, and I did not get into it. I was like, I don't understand what's going on. I'm not a very audio listener in that
Yeah,
sense.
it might be hard to look over the pier when
Right, right. And I was like, okay, this is. I tried it. The hour passed. The run was over. I was like, cool, we made it on. So I have an advance. But playlist, it really is mood dependent. I mean, I can always get behind. I mean, if I want good pace, like I'm trying to knock out some like fast miles or really lift some big weight, then shoot, like anything that has like angry vibes to it, like loud and like um,
are you more rock
emotional,
or
or
rap?
more pop.
Pop.
Think like uh, hmm, I don't know. See, that's the thing with me is like the music could have no application to my real life, but I'll be like, yeah, I'll like get in the vibe with the
Good
music. Yeah, it could have no relevant significance to my life whatsoever, but I'll be like, yes, that's a banger. I'm trying to think of one. Give me a minute.
I would say I would again go with I'm a big words person no matter the situation. Obviously it's mood dependent, but I would probably venture to say that anything that would be a walk-up song of mine would be on a workout playlist for me.
Nice.
So anything that's like inspirational, whether it's honestly I whether it's sad, whether it's happy, whether it's angry, I think the mood of the song doesn't matter as much to me. I think it's more like what the words are saying and what the message is. So anything that I would say with 100% would be my walk up song, it would be on that, like any
Mm,
sort of cardio, strength, and conditioning playlist.
fair.
Yeah.
Telephone, Lady Gaga. That's my final answer.
Okay. He's buzzed that in.
And Kelly's got all the like powerful answers, and I'm like, Home Depot, telephone,
Hey, each to their own. Like that's
quality of man.
each
Depends,
to
right?
their own. Yeah,
Yes, exactly.
100%. What would be some advice for coaches who are dealing with different situations that we've sort of spoke about on this podcast to deal with their athletes?
Oh, oh man, I could go on and on. My biggest piece of advice would be to just in any sort of way show that you care. Because at the end of the day, like, yes, you are a coach of that athlete, but I think you don't know fully whatever's happening in your athlete's life. So understanding that they could have a lot going on and just showing that no matter what it is that you care, whether that's listening or just being a shoulder to lean on, asking the questions about their family, their friends, how school's going. Um, yeah, my biggest piece of advice for coaches, no matter the situation, is just at the end of the day, showing the athlete that you're there to support them and that you care for them as a person and not just an athlete. That would be my biggest piece.
I was going to say, Kelley, that's spot on in the sense of showing you care is it speaks louder than words in a sense, like your actions through that and the actual perception of, man, I have support. Like that is huge and is honestly priceless. And I think one of the ways, viewing coaches as like a guide rather than a boss, I think is
Mhm.
a really impactful way that you can lead as a coach is by, if your philosophy is ingrained in like, I am going to guide you and lead you, support you in getting to your goals. You're coaching somebody up for that, rather than putting the pressure on yourself to know all the answers and stuff. Like that's why that in an ideal world we have staffs for to support the coach. Ideally, the coach is there to, in some contexts it's a sport specific thing. They are the expert in that area and being able to guide the athlete to whatever they need, whether it's a conversation with the coach that can happen, or if it's, hey, go talk to Manny if you're struggling with the weight program we have, but like I know Manny and he's a strength and conditioning guy. Like, oh, that's a perfect connection you can make. And whatever at the end of the day serves the athlete best is probably the best way you can show you support them and care, rather than putting the pressure on yourself of, I gotta have this answer. I gotta know what I'm, what
Yeah.
to say or what to do. Being able to have the humility and say, I actually have no clue, but I know someone who can help, and getting them to someone who might have better answers or might just be a different space for them to process. Um,
I will retweet that.
yeah, it's tough because a lot of the time, we're used to, or coaches are used to like, shouldering that load themselves, which one, it can be super burdensome for the coaches.
Mhm.
But not knowing exactly where to turn can be difficult.
Yeah,
100%.
and I was also going to add, kind of off that point, for coaches that may not know how to help or how to show that they care. I think probably the biggest piece of advice is just in any way just seek to understand. We talk about the seek to understand, then to be understood kind of a thing, and that's a prime example of at the end of the day just like seek to understand whether
Mhm.
that is at practice and this athlete's going through a mental block, say fear of something, just seek to understand instead of like react or being understood as a coach. At the end of the day, I think just as a coach, just trying to understand where that athlete is coming from is probably the best thing that you can do.
No, like that's spot on. Like that is perfect. Thank you guys so much for coming on and sharing your knowledge and take on different aspects of sports psychology. If you can shout out your Instagrams so people can know um where to reach you and stuff. I've already got them pre-pulled, so you don't need to remember your I've got them. I saw Kelley reach for her phone straight away.
No, I, I was like, I don't know what it is.
Oh man.
No, but thank you so much for having us and allowing us to kind of just have the space to share a little bit about our experience. And hopefully, if we're reaching just one person out there,
Mhm.
that it helps.
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
it's honestly, it's all good. Like I started this podcast, and I say it all the time. Like it's very selfishly for me. Like I love learning of different coaches and different, like what we discussed, like different ways of taking the same thing but applying it differently. But I'm in a position where I can share it out, which also helps whoever wants to listen to this. So I'm always very grateful and appreciative of people's time that they share with me here.
No, for sure, for sure. It's great hearing other people's perspectives too, and like, you know, every time I have a conversation with Kelley, at the very least, like I'm always learning something new, and hopefully there's some element where I might be able to impart some experience towards Kelley. But you connect with others and you build those kind of new ideas and understandings. You're like, oh, that's really cool, like nugget I can take with me and whatnot. And at the end of the day, when I think everyone's on the same page of we're wanting to better athletes and support them and make it a more prosperous environment, then like it's so much like there's a lot of joy in being able to share those spaces with people. Yeah,
100%.
but yeah, if anyone listening feels like they are compelled to reach out to either one of us, by all means. You said you do have the means to share that, or did you need us to? As you say, I'm not sure what you needed with that. Oh, we
Oh,
did that.
that's me.
Okay. Yeah, there you go. There you go. It's just my name.
Yeah,
It's simple.
we're organized on this podcast.
Oh man.
I think it's our names, Kelley. We got it down.
Alrighty.
Yeah.
I do apologize, Kelley. I feel like I put you on the spot.
Oh man. I was just not ready to see it. Oh
No,
man.
thank you guys so much for coming on. I really do appreciate you sort of going through these different aspects because it's important for our industry.
Hmm.
We also need to realize that we are dealing with humans and their performance can be tied to more than just what you see on the surface.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having us. This has been fantastic.
No, it's
Yep.
all good. Thank you. Peace.